Welcome to Journey of Enlightenment. I am your host, Dr. Roger Gopaul. Our program focuses on Vedic literature, Vedic culture, and philosophy. For the past few weeks, we have been looking at the Bhagavad Gita, the Song of the Lord. A very interesting conversation between Lord Krishna and Arjuna. We already looked at verse 1, the question of the blind king. And last week we started on verses 2 to 11, where we concentrated on the conversation that Duryodhana was having basically with himself. I will do a summary of that conversation one more time, verses 2 to 11, and we will go a little further into the meaning of this particular passage for our understanding. This particular passage, we will call it a crisis of conscience. Starting from verse 2, I will read until verse 11. Sanjay responded, "Upon witnessing the army of the Pandavas assembled for combat, King Duryodhana approached Dronacharya and uttered the ensuing words." This was a response of Sanjay to the question of the blind king. Sanjay was now prepared to address what was happening on the battlefield. He was about to describe Duryodhana and what Duryodhana was feeling. Duryodhana was intensely monitoring what the Pandavas were doing. He was closely looking at the composition of those that he had to fight. He went on to address his own teacher, Dronacharya, who so happened to be the teacher of the Pandavas as well. Duryodhana, looking at his teacher, he went on to say, "Observe, O teacher." He was asking his teacher to watch, to keenly be aware of those who were on the opposing side. He said, "The formidable army of the sons of Pandu, prepared for war by a knowledgeable disciple, the son of Drupada." What was most interesting in this particular verse is that Dronacharya very well knew that his army had 11 battalions, whereas the Pandavas only had 7. But he went to his teacher like a crying child running to his father, begging for comfort, to tell his teacher, watch, the formidable army. Why was this fear in Duryodhana? Despite the fact that he knew his army was much larger in size than the Pandavas. Also he knew that Dronacharya and Bhishma was on his side fighting this war. But like a crying child, he ran to his teacher, telling him to watch the formidable army that is confronting us. Usually, when someone is in transgression, when someone creates a wrongful act, they suffer with a crisis of conscience. There could never be peace of mind. There could never be tranquility of thought. A wrongful act will always create a disquiet mind, a mind that is turmoil, and we therefore seek someone else attention, maybe comfort, maybe excuse. What exactly was Duryodhana trying to accomplish? He went on to address his teacher. He said, and I'll repeat that verse. Notice the sons of Pandu prepared for war by a knowledgeable disciple, the son of Drupada. The Pandus were his cousins, but he never referred to them as family. Duryodhana, knowing fully well that the sons of Pandu are his own cousins, but yet referred to them as just the sons of Drupada. not even the recognition of blood relations, of friends relations. It showed his conceitful mindset. It showed a person that was self-absorbed. Also, his words to his teacher that the Pandavas were prepared for war, led by your knowledgeable disciple, was Duryodhana then casting blame on his own teacher for preparing the Pandavas in their art of war, their skills? Was he shifting responsibility from himself? Usually a person that suffers from a crisis of conscience, a transgressor, a person that commits a wrongful act, would look at someone else to blame for his deeds. Was he already willing to accept defeat because his own teacher prepared his enemies in the battle for the Mahabharata? He went on to say, behold the heroes on the sides of the Pandavas. He further plunged himself into a state of despite. He was sinking himself further into a state of despondency by identifying why the Pandavas were much stronger than his own army. There was a crisis of conscience on the part of Duryodhana. In order to give himself some courage, he had to speak to himself. Why? Because his own teacher, despite the fact that he ran to Dronacharya, his teacher never responded. Dronacharya stayed quiet and he listened. Duryodhana went on. He said, O best of Brahmins, recognize who are the foremost combatants in our army, the commanders of our army. I mention them for your knowledge. But for whose knowledge? Was it the knowledge of Dronacharya? Or was he trying to convince himself for the wrong that he did? Let us take a look at a crisis of conscience from a psychological perspective. Last day, I shared with you a very interesting story. I will briefly repeat that story in order for us to gain some insightful lessons on its meaning. The story was about a king who invited 5 persons to a great gala. They were invited in order for the king to determine who will one day be the royal treasurer. As each person entered the royal gala, they entered alone, along a passageway filled with diamonds and precious gems. Eventually, they all gathered in the royal hall. The king went to the first individual and asked him to dance. And he said, O king, I cannot dance for my head hurts. The king went to the second individual and asked him to dance. O king, I cannot dance for my feet hurt. The third individual, the king asked again, O king, I cannot dance for my arms hurt. The fourth individual, I cannot dance, for my entire body aches. The king then had his royal guards search each person and found upon them precious metals and gems. The king then went to the first invitee. Why did you steal from me? And he said to the king, It is not my fault, O king. I only stole from you because my friends dared me to do it. They are the ones who are at fault. They made me commit this act. The second person, the king went to him and said, "Why did you steal from me?" He said, "O king, I only took from you because you are so magnificently dressed, and your crown carries the most precious of jewels. Why should I not have one too? It is your fault, O king, that I stole from you." The third invitee said to the king, "O king, it is not my fault. I stole from you, but the only reason that you condemn me is because you have a personal malice against me. It is your own personal vengeance that make you accuse me." And the fourth said to the king, "O king, I stole from you, but because you have so much, and there are others who have so little, I stole from them so I stole from you so I can give to them." What we are looking at there is called the theory of neutralization, where we shift blame, we shift responsibility for our wrongful acts from ourselves to anything or anyone else. What Duryodhana was doing, he shifted responsibility for this war, and perhaps with the knowledge that he may lose this war from himself, and he was ready to tell his teacher that "you have created a formidable army, you have trained my enemies, you have upskilled them." He shifted responsibility. The theory of neutralization looks at all the reasons a person can give for committing a wrongful act. The first theory, as in the first thief, looks at the theory of pressurization, where we give a reason for our wrongful acts based upon pressures from something else or someone else. We often do so, or we often hear of others who will say, "It is not my fault. Someone else made me do it. My friends made me smoke. My friends made me become an alcoholic. My friends made me become a drug addict. My friends had me steal." It is easy for us to shift blame and to blame someone else, to cast that responsibility on someone else, rather than accept it for ourselves. The second theory of neutralization, where the thief said, "Oh no, it's not my fault. You made me do it. It is because of you I have committed this crime." Victim blaming. We see this happen in a lot of domestic disputes, where the victim is usually blamed, and the perpetrator argues that they are at no fault whatsoever. It was the victim that made them do it. In so doing, it displays mental weakness on the part of the perpetrator to say that someone else is at fault for your own wrongdoing. Another reason that we usually give under the theory of neutralization is that we commit a wrong. Why? So that a few could benefit. It's almost like the Robin Hood theory, where they make the excuse of stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. But it is noteworthy that wrong is wrong and right is right. Some may even argue, if I commit a wrong act and no one was harmed, is it still wrong? And the answer is yes, it is. Whether a wrong is committed based upon we believing and misbelieving that no one was harmed, or believing that it may benefit a few, or believing that the victim is to blame, or believing that someone else made us do it, could never justify a wrongful act. At the end of it all, we are all responsible for the decisions that we make in life. In Bhagavad Gita, Duryodhana had the choice. He had the choice to not engage in that battle. He had the choice to hand over the kingdom that was rightfully the Pandavas. But he chose otherwise. Decision determines our destiny. There is no external pressure. There is no internal pressure if we stand on the side of righteousness. If we stand on the side of righteousness, where our minds identify with that which is good, that which is pure, and that which is pleasing unto the Lord, we would never be faced with a crisis of conscience. We will never be faced with indecision, but we will always know what to do when the right time comes. There is no excuse that one can give. There is no justification that one can offer when a wrong is done. If we are to follow the teachings of Bhagavad Gita or Ramayana, we will always stand on the side of righteousness. Bhagavad Gita shares much similarities in philosophy to that of Ramayana, where we see Lord Ram, despite what he had to face, stood on the side of Dharma, stood on the side of righteousness. He did not compromise, and not one day did he complain. Not one day did he shift responsibility to anyone else. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna constantly reminded Arjuna to stand on the side of righteousness, to fight this war because it was a righteous war. There was no crisis of conscience that Arjuna had to face, but there was a crisis of conscience that Duryodhana had to encounter because he chose to fight an unrighteous war, unrighteous intentions, motivated by greed, motivated by selfishness. In this path for life, in this journey, if we stand guided by the righteousness of our God that we serve, if we stand conscious of our fellow human beings and the world that we live in, making the right decision is not all that difficult. Despite the consequences, right is right and wrong is wrong. Let us stand on the side of righteousness. Let us always uphold ourselves as that divine light walking on earth, reflecting the light of the ultimate consciousness, the supreme reality. In so doing, we do not only brighten our own journey, but we brighten the journey of all those around. I am Dr. Roger Gopaul, your host. Thank you for joining me in Journey of Enlightenment, and please join me in our next session. Thank you very much.